Today we have with us our resident analyst, that is Ken Gishinga. Ken is CEO at Mentoria and equally an economist here in Kenya. Ken, good to have you in studio today.
Thank you very much, Brian.
And of course, also joining us later on will be Mr. Wohoro Ndoho, who is a former debt manager at the National Treasury. He'll be joining us in the conversation via Zoom. Of course, we have him right there. Mr. Wohoro, also good to have you. It's a pleasure to see you once again on our weekly chat.
Asante sana, karibu sana.
Great. So let's talk about Jeff Bezos' move to step down. That is almost 30 years at the helm of Amazon, a company that has made him the world's richest, valued at around $1.17 trillion and listed in the New York Securities Exchange. Pundits were arguing that, I mean, who leaves a job at such a time, at such unprecedented times during a pandemic, which has ravaged the world, economies world over? Why did Jeff Bezos step down? Mr. Wohoro, if you go first.
From everything I've read, is that it's come to a point where I think there's a fair bit of pressure coming upon Amazon in the context of trade practices, abuse of its monopoly power. Okay. But also it sort of fits a pattern with a lot of these CEOs in America, where at the heights of their ascendancy, they tend to move on to more philanthropic endeavors and things like pursuing technology, space, a lot of things to do with climate change. I think he has other interests that he'd like to spend his time on. But beyond that, I think it's also because even though he's leaving, he will still be involved in Amazon as the executive chairman. So he's leaving really the hot seat of being a CEO, but not the business per se.
All right, and you've mentioned something really important right there, that most American CEOs and most CEOs overseas, after they have led for quite some time, they now want to go into more sort of human-oriented, sort of social entrepreneurship, functions like things to do with climate change, space exploration, and all that. And we've seen that even with Elon Musk, who is Tesla's CEO. But as we continue this conversation, I'd like to involve Mr. Ken Gishinga on this. We're looking at the profile of the person taking, the person that now Jeff Bezos is passing the baton to, who is Andy Jassy, Harvard-trained economist and a person who has proved himself in the cloud computing, field. Mr. Gishinga, what do you think, Andy Jassy's influence will be in Amazon's future businesses?
Indeed, when you think of Amazon Web Services, that has become the biggest part of Amazon, not least because of the amount of online traffic that it conducts. So I think it was a natural selection that the future of Amazon is really with Amazon Web Services. And he has been quite a vocal personality. He's somewhat different from Jeff Bezos. He's been able to throw a few punches to Oracle, to Microsoft. So we expect to see somebody a bit more vocal, a bit more bullish. But I think if you think of Amazon as a company, I mean, the future can only seem bright from where we look at it.
Still staying with matters cloud computing, Mr. Gishinga. Now, what does it mean to the average buyer or the day-to-day use of Amazon, and even in Kenya here, where people ship a lot of, equipment from Amazon from overseas? What does it mean, particularly on matters of cloud computing? We are seeing so many companies going that direction. Google, was perhaps the forerunner in terms of cloud computing and convergence of their services. We are seeing Facebook going that direction with after it's acquired WhatsApp. So what do you think the role of convergence of, I'd like to call it the convergence of these services in reference to cloud computing. What do you think it's going to do to the average, the common, the day-to-day user of Amazon?
Well, I think there'll be two sides to it, one positive and one negative. I think the positive side will be the cost will definitely come down. It's going to be much cheaper for companies to be able to serve their clients when the data is stored in the cloud. So the cost part might trickle down to the users, and companies might be more efficient. I think the downside will be issues around privacy. And even here in Kenya, as we move towards open banking and the whole idea of data being stored, third parties having access to banking data being stored in the cloud, that starts bringing issues of security and issues of privacy. So it almost seems as if it'll have its positives and its negatives. But if we're able to manage issues of security and privacy well, I expect to see more efficiency and more innovation, because even smaller companies can be able to roll out extremely global services with a fraction of the cost of what it would have been maybe several years ago.
It's quite a telling picture right there of matters of cybersecurity and all that, particularly owing to the fact that that has been a conversation that has elicited a lot of emotions. Particularly recently with the Facebook demanding the users to sort of converge their contact details with WhatsApp. Let's stick with matters, being philosophical and technology and leaning towards more social entrepreneurship, entrepreneurship ventures right now for Jeff Bezos. Of course, he says that he's going to step down in Q3 of this year, and then his predecessor, Andy Jassy, will be taking the wings of power at Amazon. Now, Mr. Ohoro, back to you. Do you think Bezos will really fit those new roles that he says he wants to take up, and particularly owing to the fact that we have seen him being more, capitalistic and all that? Are we seeing him going more social, and what would it take for him to, achieve his goals?
Well, my view is that I don't think you're fooled. Whenever we talk about these multi-billionaires going into philanthropy, it's almost always a bit of a misnomer, because, for example, Bill Gates, the moment he left Microsoft and went into philanthropy, he also became an investor on a very large scale. And if anything, I think he more than doubled his wealth since he left Microsoft. So let's not kid ourselves that even though they're going to philanthropic work, they're actually just doing it for the good of humanity. They are going to make money, and they're going to make a lot more money.
Wow.
And they'll be freed from some of the constraints that come from being a single business leader. And they can, span a lot more other businesses and ventures, and almost all of them will be profitable. You can take that to the bank.
You threw a jab right there, because you sort of say that they're not really going for social entrepreneurship. It's simply money they're going to make on the side. But let's still staying with matters of philanthropy, and particularly talking about Bezos still. And Mr. Ohoro, I still want to pick your mind on this. You've said that it is still an entrepreneurial journey. Of course, it's going to make him some money and all that stuff. But now, how will the people benefit, particularly owing to the fact that this guy has made it? He's the world's richest. His company is valued at $1.17 trillion, listed in the New York Securities Exchange. And so how are people expected to benefit from things like special exploration, which are part of his priorities? He has other investments that he's pursuing also. So could you break it down for us, how people are going to really benefit?
Well, one of his key passions is climate change. Mm-hmm. And with the sort of capital he brings to that arena, similar to what Bill Gates brought to the whole health sector, I expect that you will get a lot of investment around green energy, encouraging the growth of businesses or entrepreneurship that enhances the green revolution, as we mentioned, both at the Davos, but also by previous administrations before the Trump one. So yes, there will be benefit, there will be social benefit. I guess I'm one of those both. I'm a bit more cynical that even where they do that, and there'll be benefit to the society, there'll be that he'll bring what you call his entrepreneurial skills for the social problem, and I suppose that can only be good for us when we have someone like him invest into that space. I would have to add that it's not just the likes of climate change. he's also got other pursuits. For example, this whole notion of space. He seems to be particularly obsessed or curious about space, and he really read his life story ever since he was a boy. I think he'd always wanted to do that. So that, I think, will be something of his passion. And I'll be very interested to see how he links that to his social philanthropy work. Because I think if you watch this space, there's going to be some interesting innovations, I think, on that that whole idea of how he invests in space and yet impacts humanity.
All right, thank you so much, gentlemen, for your sentiments on that. We're going to continue with more stories, but we're still going to stay with our panelists who are going to guide us onto these conversations, making our headlines on Biz Chat Weekly. Now, on to other stories. East Africa Breweries Limited's profit has posted a 47% drop in its after-tax for the 6-month period, declined compared to the same period last year to reach 3.8 billion shillings. This was primarily driven by a one-off tax provision. The group recorded a net sales decline of 3% to hit 44.5 billion shillings for the half year ended December 2020 compared to the same period last year. The performance is 53% better than the previous half, January to June 2020, that was significantly impacted by COVID-19 restrictions, which saw a directive to have bars and pubs shut down to contain the spread of the virus. The drop in profits could see the brewer cut back on advertising spending, as well as considering staff layoffs to place a lead on running costs. Gentlemen, I'd like to pick your mind again on East Africa Breweries results that we've just read. Just general commentaries on them. I'd like Ken Gishinga to go first. What are some of the things that you think impacted, that kind of a performance this year?
Well, I mean, if you think of EABL as a counter, we have 5 counters that dominate 80% of trading at the stock market, and EABL is one of them. So it's always going to be a share that has to be looked at quite frequently. I think the fundamentals still are in order. Obviously, their biggest flagship product in terms of the Tusker product, obviously that during the COVID pandemic with clubs closed and restaurants closed, obviously that was going to be expected. But I think the broader picture is it's still the dominant player in the FMCG space. It has new leadership, and it's still the business model. It's still viable. So I still expect to see the stock price being attractive to various investors.
All right, Mr. Ohoro, we understand that East Africa Breweries Limited is part of a global conglomerate, and so for them to post such kind of results means something. What does it mean to the larger global outfit of the East Africa Breweries Limited?
I think for Diageo is once you get a flagship company like EABL, it's been making money hand over fist for a long time, and I don't imagine if you're Diageo in Ireland you would feel that it's done badly. If anything, I think it's fared pretty well in the context of COVID. And as we see the economy rebounding, as we see especially the hospitality industry opening up with other restrictions being lowered or being eased or not being enforced as vigorously, then the prospects for the future are pretty good. We don't hear much about Keroche anymore, and I think I'll be very curious to see how the likes of a small operator like that is faring during this time. Yeah.
Wow, it's interesting that you've mentioned Keroche right there, but that's a discussion for another day. Let's talk about their move that they now want to cut back on their advertisement costs, and we have seen a lot of digital influencers commissioned ostensibly to boost sales among, peer-to-peer influencing. What's your take on that, and do you think it's going to be effective in boosting East Africa Breweries Limited's brands?
Yes, I think one of the things that I find really interesting, and I think we should all take a leaf from this big conglomerate, is for all their size, they do a lot of research, and none of their decisions are ever made without a fair bit of a heavy investment in research. And the truth of the matter is that business models are changing. One, for example, is the fact that a growing majority of consumers are extremely tech savvy and basically exist within the internet space, the social media. And so where goes breweries, I expect will go many other companies. The reality is that your consumers change, the demographic has changed. My generation, 50 plus, are a small minority, and the vast majority are in that social media space. And so the whole model of advertising, for example, is definitely on its last legs, in my view.
All right. And those are sentiments from our resident panelists right here on BizChat Weekly, who have been talking about briefly about the results posted by the East Africa Breweries Limited. And earlier on, we had a talk about Amazon's Jeff Bezos, who was stepping down to give leadership to the next crop of leaders. Now, let's take a next story. In a quest for a smooth recovery, the hospitality industry players in the South Coast have called on the government to streamline the admission of COVID-19 testing centers to ensure